So this last question comes from Facebook, which is, what's your best guess on what a post-Brexit immigration system might look like?
Well, assuming that we do indeed leave broadly under the terms currently envisaged, and that we have a government led by Theresa May pursuing broadly the policy that she favours, then we will have a policy that has few or no opportunities for people to come here to do low and medium skilled jobs, but a system that has a series of threshold, a salary threshold and maybe a skill or qualification threshold for people coming from either inside or outside the EU that they'll have to meet. So you'll have to have a job offer, you'll have to have a salary in excess of possibly £30,000 a year, and then you'll be able to apply for a work permit, for which you'll have to pay a lot of money and go through a lot of other bureaucratic hurdles as well. So it'll be nothing like as easy as free movement. But it'll be that sort of skill-based system. And this is indeed the type of system that most countries who are not a member of a big free movement area like the EU operate at the moment. It is not that different from the sort of system. I mean, people talk about the Australian system, but it's not that different from the Canadian system or the New Zealand system, or although it's or a system that a number of other countries operate. It is reasonably standard.
Right, so it's quite common across.
It is quite common. I mean, the big set of choices is how, given you're going to have a system that looks like that, how liberal do you want to be? Because at one end you could have a system that looks like that, that has very high thresholds, very high charges, very bureaucratic and demanding, and lets in very few people. On the other hand, you could have a system, as actually Australia, New Zealand and Canada do, it's actually pretty liberal. Remember, they have these systems, but they actually let in more people than we do, considerably more people than we do. Even though we have free movement, immigration to Australia, New Zealand and Canada is much higher in relation to their population than immigration to the UK. So you can have a very liberal system, you can have a very restrictive system. That's a political choice to be taken by a future government.
And I know that there's been some talk about like quotas and things like that, and you mentioned that Theresa May before had talked about a particular target. Do you think that might come into play with a post-Brexit immigration system?
Well, it depends. That again is a big political argument. We know Theresa May wants to have a quota and she wants it to be set relatively tight, but that's not necessarily a view shared by her own cabinet. Let alone by the business community, which would want a more liberal system, and the public as a whole has very different views on this. So these are very much political choices.
Right. It sounds like the devil is in the detail of how the system will be organized in terms of how it will affect the UK.
Well, the devil is always in the detail on any of these sorts of things because they're very complicated, and the immigration rules runs to 50,000 pages or so. There's a lot of detail, but actually, when I say that you can have a more liberal system or a more restrictive system, that's not about the detail. That's about the sort of country you want to be. It's about what your approach is to immigration. Countries like Canada and New Zealand have chosen collectively, politically, not about the detail, but collectively they have a vision of countries that are built on immigration, open to immigration because they think it's good for the economy and good for society. Other countries, historically Japan, although even they are opening up a bit more now, Japan have had a very opposite view, where they take a much more restrictionist view, a much more view that to be Japanese you really need to be Japanese as opposed to being Canadian. You just need to come to Canada and say, I'm Canadian, I believe in Canada, I'm going to be Canadian. You can do that. It's pretty hard to do that in Japan. So these are two different versions, but this is not about detail. This is about, and I think, the UK is very conflicted on this. There are people who believe one version of that and people who believe another version of that. That's the sort of political argument we have to sort out. Once you've sorted out what your broad approach is, then of course you can argue about the detail for years and years. But actually, I think it's more the vision of whether you want to be an open, liberal, globally oriented economy, and society that you really have to choose.
I think that's probably too big of a question for us to go into tonight. So that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you very, very much, Jonathan, for your time. We've really, really appreciated all your answers. I think that it's been a really, really enlightening chat. And thank you to everyone who's on the other side of this camera for sitting in, sharing your questions, and watching our Q&A.